very good evening to all of you. Welcome to Options Trading Lesson 4. And today we will be understanding options pricing, right? We'll be talking about what is in the money, what is at the money, what is out of the money. So that is what we'll be covering today. In case you have still not completed the previous three lessons, the link is provided in the description. Make sure you go through all the three sessions. The course is available both in English as well as in Hindi. The link is provided for both of them. So let's get started with today's session. Before we move ahead, I am Surjit Kakar, and let's get done with the formalities. Make sure you go through the disclosure, which talks about the representation, the risk disclosure, risk involved in the market, and also about the copyrights. So yes, today we are on lesson 4, and lesson 4 is about options pricing. That is what we will be understanding today. And then in the next session, we'll look into some uh, basic option strategies, right? So we'll be building upon it, not to worry. I got some comments as well that, don't keep it too very basic. So not to worry, I'll be covering everything that is related to options. So it will be not just the basic course, from the basic to different strategies to Greeks, everything will be covered, not to worry about it. All right, so let's talk about options pricing. Now we know that options are priced because of the script and also because of the expectation of the crowd. So options are not just priced because of the script and all, but also because of the crowd expectation. Now the example, if you try to recall, when we talked about that apartment example in lesson 1, we said that the seller, we did a contract with him for 5 lakh rupees, right? And that contract was to buy the apartment for 2 cr in 3 months. Now, if the seller had an expectation that within a month or two, very high probability the prices can go up from 2 cr to, let's say, 3 cr, he might not be interested in doing that contract for 5 lakh rupees. He might be asking for more money, maybe 10 lakhs to do that contract. So can you see, even though the price of the underlying has not changed, but because of his expectation, he might not be interested in doing that contract for 5 lakhs. So that is what we also talked about in lesson 1, that the option pricing is not just based on the underlying, it is also based on the expectation of the crowd. All right. So therefore, options have two types of values that added together define the total value of the option. So whenever we are buying an option or selling an option, we know the price at which the transaction happens is called as the premium. So now we understand that this premium is not made up of one factor, it is made up of two factors. And let's understand what are these two factors. So the premium is made up of intrinsic value plus the time value. So today will be understanding what is intrinsic value, what is time value. So these two combined together make the premium. Now at times options can also have just the time value, no intrinsic value. That can also happen. So we'll look into different examples as we move ahead with the session. So again, the intrinsic value plus the time value can be the premium, right? So options with intrinsic value, their premium will be the total of intrinsic plus time value. And options without intrinsic value, the premium will be exactly equal to the time value. So if it doesn't have intrinsic value, it's just the time value. So these are the two things which makes the option premium. It's the intrinsic value and the time value. We will be understanding what is time value. We will be understanding what is intrinsic value. But if there is no intrinsic value, then your premium. So in a way, what I'll say is, if your intrinsic value is 0, then your premium is equal to time value, right? That is what we are talking about. That if there is no intrinsic value, then premium and time value are exactly the same. All right. So, what is intrinsic value? The amount of money that could currently be realized by exercising the option and liquidating the resulting script. Intrinsic value cannot be a negative number. So, now let's try to understand it in a very simplified way. So, let's imagine I buy a call, right? So again, let's recap from lesson 3. Buying is positive, call is positive, plus plus means plus, which means now we have a bullish position. And because we bought, buying means we have the right to buy, right? Because calls, they give you the right to buy. So because we have bought a positive unit, so we have a long position, which means we have the right to buy. Now let's assume that I bought a call which was at strike price. Let's say I bought a call which was at strike price 95, right? And now let's assume that prices they started moving up, the underlying. So when I bought the call, let's assume the current market price of the underlying was also at 95, but now the prices have started moving up, and now the current market price is at 100. So the current market price is at 100, but I have the right that I can still buy it at 95. So do I have an advantage or do I have a disadvantage? I definitely have an advantage. Why? Because by exercising this, I can get the underlying at a price which is cheaper than the current market price, right? So this is what is called as the intrinsic value, right? So if it has, so if it, just to make it very simplified, if the strike price gives you an advantage, right? So whatever that advantage is, like in this case, that advantage is 5 rupees, that is the intrinsic value. But let's assume that I bought it at 95 and it started moving down and now it has 90, right? So if the current market price is at 90, I know that if I want to buy, I can immediately buy at 90 rupees from the current market price. Why would I like to buy at 95? So now this is not giving me any advantage. So now it does not have any intrinsic value. So what is intrinsic value? Intrinsic value is the amount of money that could be realized by exercising the option and converting it into a resulting script or whatever the underlying asset is. So again, an example, let's say uh, very simplified. Let's say again, I buy a call which is at 100. So if the prices they start moving up, I will always have an advantage, be that 101, 102, 103, because whatever the current market price is, I still have the right to buy it cheaper than the current market price. So that's the advantage I'm having. So if the current market price is at 101, so my intrinsic value is 1 rupee. If the current market price is at 102, then my intrinsic value is 2 rupees, because current market price is 102, but I can still buy it at 100. Similarly, if the current market price is 103, now the intrinsic value is 3 rupees, right? So that is what the intrinsic value is, the advantage which you are having in that position as of now. Time value, whatever value the option has in addition of the intrinsic value, is your time value, right? So for this, as we move forward, I'll show you some examples. It will be much easier to understand with an example. Now, options, they also have some wasting asset. The portion of the option premium that reflects the amount of time remaining till the expiry of the option contract. The more the time value. Intrinsic value do not waste, because we know time is always moving, right? So time never stops. So your time value will keep on eroding every day, right? So that is what happens. But the intrinsic value will always remain there. Now, what is in the money? An option contract which has intrinsic value is always in the money. So example, when I said if I buy a call which is at 100 and the current market price is at 106, so what is the intrinsic value? The intrinsic value is 6. So any option that has intrinsic value is always in the money, right? So again, an option which is giving you an advantage is always an option which is in the money. If let's assume prices come down and now the prices are at 104, I still have an intrinsic value of 4 rupees now, which means this call is still in the money. But if prices they further go down and now go to 99, right? Now this does not have any intrinsic value. Why? Because intrinsic value again cannot be a negative number. Now intrinsic value is 0, because currently I can buy it in the market for 99. Why would I like to buy it at 100? So now it is not an option which is in the money. Why? Because now it is no longer having any intrinsic value. So any option which has intrinsic value is in the money. Out of the money, the options which do not have intrinsic value. So again, when I talked about, let's say I buy a call at 100 and now the current market price is at 99. Now this does not have any intrinsic value because I can buy it cheaper in the market. Why would I like to buy it expensive? So since it does not have any intrinsic value, this is out of the money option. All right. So let's take an example of a call and then we'll look at an example of a put, which will make it now much easier for you to understand. So let's assume that a stock or a script is trading at 927 rupees and 30 paise. And what I do is I buy a call which has a strike price of 920. So the current market price is 927.30 and I'm buying 920, which means from the current market price, I'm already buying it cheaper, right? I am buying the right to buy it cheaper than the current market price. And how much cheap? I can buy it 7 rupees 30 paise cheap because 927.30 minus 920 gives you the intrinsic value. So this call option as of now has an intrinsic value of 7 rupees 30 paise because that is the advantage I have, because this gives me the right to buy it at 920. So that's my intrinsic value. Now let's assume that to buy this call I paid a premium of 17 rupees and 80 paise, right? So if I paid 17 rupee 80 paise, I know out of these 17 rupee 80 paise, 7 rupee 30 paise was the intrinsic value. So whatever is left over, that is my time value. So like we talked about premium, so in this case my premium is 17.80. What is my intrinsic value? My intrinsic value was 7.30. So what is my time value? Time value will be premium minus my intrinsic value, which will give me the answer, that is 10.5. So if I talk about the time value of this option, it has a time value which is my premium 17.10 minus my intrinsic value which was 7.30. So now you can see that the options premium are made up of two components. One of the component was the intrinsic value, which is the advantage I'm having as of now. And whatever is left over, that is basically the time value. So now we can see that in this option premium value, the time value is 10 rupees and 50 paise. So that's your example of a call. Now let's also look at an example of a put. So if you buy a put, right, again, buying means positive, put is a negative, is a negative unit, right? So I was not able to recall the terminology, right? So put is a negative unit. So again, plus minus means minus, which means now I have the right to sell if I'm buying a put. So let's say the script is trading at 337.40 and I buy a put which is 350. So even though the current market price is 337.40, by buying this put, I have the right to sell it at 350. That is what the put gives me, the right to sell. So if you look at it, if I go to the market and sell as of now, I will have to sell cheaper. But this gives me a right to buy it, to sell it at an expensive price, which means I'm getting an advantage. And how big that advantage is? That advantage is 350 minus 337.40, which is 12 rupees and 60 paise, which means this is the intrinsic value of this put option as of now, right? Because that is the advantage I'm having. So if the premium was 19 rupee 30 paise, so now I understand that premium is intrinsic plus time value. I know the value of premium. I know the value of intrinsic, which is 12.60. So if I have to calculate my time value, my time value will be the premium minus my intrinsic value, which in this case will be 6 rupees and 70 paise. So the time value for this option is 6 rupees 70 paise plus the intrinsic value makes it a total of 19.30 rupees. So that's the example of call and put as an example to understand that premium is made up of two components. One of the component is intrinsic value, the other component is time value, and together they make your premium. Now, in the money options, an option is said to be in the money if it contains intrinsic value. We just talked about it. So calls currently, currently script which is above. Okay, all right. So if you talk about calls, so wherever the current market price is, right, whatever calls you have below that current market price will always be in the money, right? So current script price is above the strike price. So all the strike prices below this current market price will always be in the money. Why? Because they will give me the right to buy it at a cheaper price, right? So let's assume that we have and an underlying which is trading at, let's say, 100 rupees, right? That's my current market price. Oops. Current market price. Now all these strikes which will be below this, right? So let's imagine we have a strike price of 95, 90, 85, 80, 75, 70, all these are in the money options. Why? Because if I buy this one, this gives me an intrinsic value of 30 rupees. If I buy this one, it gives me an intrinsic value of 25 rupees. This gives me an intrinsic value of 20 rupees, 15 rupees, 10 rupees, 5 rupees. So can you see all of these, they have some intrinsic value, and that intrinsic value is basically the advantage which I'm getting, right? So for calls, current script price is above the strike price. So all the strike prices which are below the current market price will always be in the money. Similarly, if you talk about put, the opposite will be true. Current script price is below the strike price. So if this is my current market price, again, let's take the same example, 100. Now all the strike price is above this for put, because put gives you the right to sell. So I can, you know, buy the right to sell at 105, 110, 115, 120. Now, can you see all these are giving me advantage because current market price is 100. I can sell 5 rupees expensive. I can sell 10 rupees expensive. I can sell 15 rupees expensive. I can sell 20 rupees expensive. So, all of them, they have intrinsic value. Here, the intrinsic value is 5. For this one, intrinsic value is 10. For this one, intrinsic value is 15. For this one, intrinsic value is 20. So for put, current script price is below the strike price. So all those options will be in the money options. Out of the money, the option is said to be out of the money if it consists only time value. Out of money options have no intrinsic value. So again, in case of calls, what is going to happen? Current script price is below the strike price. So let's imagine that current market price is 100. Now, all the calls which will be above 100, let's say a call at 105, call at 110, a call at 115, a call at 120, they do not have any intrinsic value. Why? Because if you can buy cheaper at the current market price, why would you buy a right to buy 5 rupees expensive or 10 rupees expensive or 15 rupee expensive or 20 rupee expensive? So they do not have any advantage, they do not have any intrinsic value. So all these strikes which are above the current market price for calls will always be out of the money. And similarly, the opposite will be true for puts. All the strike prices which are below, right? So current script price is above the strike. So again, this is 100 current market price. Now all these put strikes which are below this. So if you have a put which is at 95, if you have a put which is 90, you have a put which is 85, you have a put which is 80, all these are out of the money. Why? Because they are not giving you any advantage, because if you buy a right to sell, why would you sell 5 rupees cheaper than the current market price? You can already sell at 100. Similarly, why would you sell 10 rupees cheap? You can already sell at an expensive price which is 100. Why would you sell at 85? You can already sell at current market price which is 100. So all these puts are out of the money because they do not have any intrinsic value. So that's your out of the money. And then you also have at the money option. At the money option is the one which is closest to the current market price and is said to be at the money, which may or may not have intrinsic value, right? So it's not always that at the money will always have intrinsic. It might have, it might not have. The at the money options will contain the greatest amount of time value for the given expiry month and is the most reactive to changes in the market, right? So that is what you have to remember. So again, for calls, the one which is closest to the current market price. So let's imagine, we are trading at, let's say I buy a, let's say we have a call which is at 95, and then we have a call which is at, let's say 100, and let's say the current market price is at 96. So because we know this one is the nearest to the current market price, this is at the money, right? Now, even if this was at 94, now you can see it doesn't have any intrinsic value, but still this is the nearest one. Still this would be at the money because 90 would be now far off, right? This will be the nearest one. So this is still at the money. So that is why it might have intrinsic value. It might not have intrinsic value, but the one which is nearest to the current market price, the strike is called as the at the money option. The same thing applies for the put, closest to the current market price, right? So that is what we call as the at the money options. Now, in the money options, current script price is above the strike price. That is, so just to recap, right? What is in the money? What is out of the money? So let's say this is my current market price. So all the calls which will be below the current market price will always be in the money. So current script price is above. So script price is above. All the strikes are below. If you talk about puts, what is going to happen is, so this is for calls. For puts, all the puts strike which are above the current market price, or the current market price is below these strikes. So current market price is below the strike, so all these puts will be in the money which are above the current market price. Similarly, at the money, it will be the one which is closest to the current market price, be that calls, be that puts. And talking about out of the money, in case of calls, whatever strikes are above the current market price, they will be out of the money. So this was in the money, this was in the money, and now all the puts which are below the current market price are out of the money, right? Because they do not have any intrinsic value, they do not have any intrinsic value. These do have intrinsic values. So that is the difference between in the money, out of the money, and at the money. All right. So we know price, the options are priced because of the script price and because of the expectation of the crowd. Therefore, we talked about that the premium is made up of two things, the intrinsic value plus the time value. If you talk about intrinsic value, it is only affected by a change in price of the underlying. So what do we mean by that? Example, I buy a call which is at 100 and the current market price is, let's say, 103. So currently my intrinsic value is 3. But if this script keeps moving up and goes to 104, now my intrinsic value has changed from 3 to 4, right? So that is why it is only affected by the change in price of the underlying. So if the price of the underlying will change, my intrinsic value will change. In case it goes down to 102, now my intrinsic value from 3 goes down to 2. Right now, it does not waste away or decay, because wherever the current market price is, if it is at 102 today, or be that after 10 days, intrinsic will remain 2, right? The intrinsic value does not decay. The intrinsic value only changes if the value of the underlying changes. The next thing is your time value. Now, time value is the wasting portion of the option premium, because whatever is the time value at expiry, time value will always be 0. And if you have some intrinsic value, that is the only thing which will be left over. So time value is the wasting portion. It decays, and at expiry, the time value will always be 0. So it is decaying, and on expiry, the time value will always be 0, be that calls, be that puts, doesn't make any difference. So now let's look at some examples of in the money, at the money, and I mean for both calls and puts. So here you can see we have in the money call. Now, why is it in the money call? Because if you look at the current market price, the current market price is 9266.75, and let's assume that I am buying a call which is 9250. So even though the current market price is 9266, I have the right to buy it cheaper, right? So if I have the right to buy it cheaper, I am having an advantage, and that is what we call as the intrinsic value. Now, how much is that intrinsic value? 9266.75 minus the strike price, which is 9250, and that advantage is 16 rupees and 75 paise. So that's my intrinsic value. But if you look at the premium, you can see the premium is 322.90, which means if you're buying this option, you will have to pay 322 rupees 90 paise. Now, out of this 322.90 paise, we know 16 rupees 70 paise is my intrinsic value. So what is my time value? 322.90 minus 16.75, which is 306.15. So if I am buying a call at a premium of 322.90 for a strike price 92.50 with an expiry which, let's say in this case, was 30th April, like here you can see it's 30th April. So what is going to happen if the script value does not change at expiry? It will only be worth 16 rupees 75 paise, because at expiry this time value will become 0, and this will only be worth 16.75. So the value at expiry if the script is unchanged. So if the underlying is not changing, only time is passing. Just because of time passing, at expiry, I would have lost 306 rupees 15 paise, which was the time value. I will only be left with the intrinsic value, which is 16.75, and that is what we talked about. That intrinsic value does not decay. Time value keeps on decaying, and at expiry, time value will always be 0. So that's example of a call. Now, if you talk about out of the money example of a call. So if you talk about now this one, the current market price is again 9266.75 paise. And now I'm buying a call which is 9300 call. Now, if I'm buying 9300 call, I can already buy it at a cheaper price in the market, which means buying this call is not giving me any advantage, which basically implies I do not have any intrinsic value because 26675 minus 9300 because intrinsic value cannot be negative. The intrinsic value is zero. So whatever you are paying here, which is 288 rupees point 75 paise, this complete value is now my time value. So if the script price remains unchanged till expiry, this will become zero because anyhow it doesn't have any intrinsic value, and at expiry time value will become zero. This was already zero for us, so the whole thing erodes, and at expiry the option will be at zero. So here are example of in the money option, which is a call, and in the money option, or sorry, out of the money option, which is the call. And now you can see the difference that the option premium can just be the time value, or it can also be intrinsic value plus time value, depending upon whether it is in the money or out of money. All right, now let's take put example. So if you look at put example, so now we are buying a put at 93 strike. 93 strike means even though the current market price is 92.6675, now I have the right to sell it at 93, which gives me an advantage because from the current market price I can sell at an expensive price. So what is the intrinsic value? 9300 minus 92.6675. So I have an advantage of 33 rupees 25 paise. So now I know that out of this 257 rupees 5 paise which I'm paying as the options premium, 33 rupees is my intrinsic value, and the balance, which is 257.05 minus 33.25, 223 rupees 80 paise, that's my time value. So if at expiry the script remains unchanged, so let's imagine that expiry the script is still at the same price, I would still have 33 rupees 25 paise as value of that option, even though the time value will become zero. So this will become zero and will only be left with the intrinsic value. Now let's look at an example of out of money puts. So let's assume that I buy a 9250 put. So if I'm buying a 9250 put, current market price is more expensive, right? So this is not giving me any advantage because if I want to sell, I can already sell at a better price in the current market. So if I now do 9250 minus this, because the number cannot be negative, I mean the intrinsic value cannot be negative, means that this has zero intrinsic value. So whatever you're paying, which is 232.60 paise, 232.60 paise, that complete is your time value, because this option which was out of the money was not having any intrinsic value. The complete value is basically the complete premium is basically my time value in this case. All right, so that takes care of examples of just give me a minute. All right, so that takes care of examples of in the money call. Right now we saw how in the money call can have both intrinsic as well as the time value. We also saw how out of money call will only have time value. We also saw how in the money puts will have, in fact, if it is in the money, it will have both intrinsic as well as time value, and out of the money puts will not have any intrinsic value, they will only be having the time value. And how we can calculate, that is also something we just saw. Now this means other than the underlying, right, because of the move of the underlying, yes, the intrinsic value will be getting affected. Now the question is what affects the time value. Now time value is affected by different you know different components. Now what are these different components? As we move forward, we'll understand, we call them as options Greek, but let's keep it simple as if now. So the time value gets affected by these six components. Now if you talk about these six components, what are these components? The very first one is the interest rate, the cost of holding the underlying to expiry. Now this is the interest rates which does not change every other day, because whenever you have that RBI policy, then you get to know what is the interest rate, which is probably changing maybe once in 3 months. So again, it's not changing almost every other day. Similarly, if you talk about the underlying price, this keeps on changing. So that's basically the current price of the script. Strike price, whatever strike price you have selected, that is what you bought the option or you sold the option, right? That is what the strike price is. Time to expiry, you already know the number of days till the end of the options contract at the time of doing the transaction. whether it is a call or whether it is a put, because both of them are priced differently. And price volatility, this is the expectation of future price movement, right? So that is basically the human emotion, what people are expecting, what the crowd is expecting. So now if you look into all these six variables, I mean six components, let's see which one of them are fixed and which one of them variable. So if you talk about interest rate, it's more and less the fixed is fixed, because like I said, every probably once in 3 months the repo rate is changing or the interest rate is changing, so it doesn't make a lot of difference. If you talk about the price of the underlying, that is variable because it keeps on changing throughout the day. If you talk about the strike price, this is fixed because when you selected your strike price, once you have entered that trade, the strike price is not changing. So if you bought 100 call, it will remain as 100 call. Time to expiry is also fixed because you already know at the time of entering how many days are left or how many months are left till expiry. Whether you're buying a call or whether you're buying a put, that is also fixed. But price volatility, that is not fixed because this can change due to people expectation, right? If it is some good news, people might start expecting something else. If bad news comes, people might start expecting something else. So this is variable. So if you look at all these components, the ones which are variable is your underlying price and the volatility, which basically changes your time value. And these two affect the time value the greatest, right? And out of even these two, I'll say your uh, volatility, which is basically called as the implied volatility. As we move ahead, we'll be learning what is implied volatility, that has the highest impact on the time value, right? So now we understand what factors affects the time value portion of an option, and out of these, which components are fixed and which components are variable. So this is what we talked about the last session, that we can buy options, right? Buying an option gives you the right. If you're buying a call, you get the right to buy a stock. If you're buying a put, you get the right to sell the stock. Whenever you are buying options, you are paying. That is why it's a debit strategy. When you're buying options, your risk is limited to the premium you have paid and your reward is unlimited. And as a buyer, you can always exercise your right. But if you are selling options gives you the obligation but not the right. Selling a call gives you the obligation to sell the stock, and selling a put gives you the obligation to buy the stock. But when you are selling, you are collecting some premium. That is why they are credit strategies. And in selling options, your risk is always limited to the maximum profit is the premium you have collected, but the sorry, the risk is unlimited, but the reward is limited, right? So risk is unlimited because you are collecting limited amount, which is your premium. That is the maximum reward you can have, but your risk is unlimited. And yes, you also have the risk of getting assigned, because if the option expires in the money, you will be assigned for it. Now let's build upon it and let's move to next thing. So now this is what we talked about. We also talked about that the options contracts, they have some specifications. What are those specifications? They will have some term means their expiry date, right? So they will have some expiry date, and we talked about that generally for most of these scripts we have the front month, the next month, and the far month. But for some very liquid markets, you might also have weekly options, right? So that is what the expiry is. We also talked about that these options, they have some strike prices, and these strike prices can make the option in the money, at the money, or out of the money. And now you also understand what is in the money, what is at the money, what is out of the money. In the money is any option which is giving you an advantage, that is always in the money. Any option which is not giving you any advantage is always out of the money. And the option which is nearest to the current market price, whether it has intrinsic value or it doesn't have any intrinsic value, is at the money. So again, just to recap, all options which have intrinsic value are in the money. All options which do not have intrinsic value are out of the money. And the strike price, which is nearest to the current market price, which might have intrinsic value or might not have intrinsic value, is called as at the money option. Now, when we talk about these options, whenever you are trading them, you will have to either pay some premium or you'll be collecting some premium, and this premium is made up of two components, which is your intrinsic value. Now we also understand what is the intrinsic value, that is the advantage you're having, and whatever is left over is basically the time value. So that brings us to the end of today's session. I hope this was helpful. And I do understand options initially can be a little bit complex. I'm trying to break it into as small chunks as possible and not overload you people. That is why I'm going, one topic at a time. So if you're liking these sessions, make sure hit the thumbs up button. And if you know any of your friends who is interested in learning options, you can share my channel link with them. So thank you so much for joining in. I will be seeing you probably on Friday now, uh, which is where we'll be doing the same topic in Hindi, and we will be understanding again what is in the money, at the money, out of the money in Hindi. So until we meet next, enjoy your evening. Take care. Good night. Bye bye.